All right, everybody. So we have Børge Fagerli with us today. Welcome, Børge.
Thank you.
And so today I'm going to be making a donation to cancer research. Thomas Seyfried is somebody that Børge likes a lot of his work, and so we're going to make a contribution there. And just for the people who, I think a lot of people do know who you are in this field, but, having done it for so long, how did you get into this? Like, how did your story start?
Yeah, I guess it's a story that people that have attended conferences where I'm speaking have heard before, but it was generally driven by me being a sort of a dork and a nerd.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, my buddies would always be bigger, faster, stronger than me, and having some physical attributes would be a way to get noticed, not only by my peers, but also the girls. So,
Sure.
it's sort of where it all started. And, I had a father with, sort of an abusive relationship there. So it's sort of the Lane Norton story all over again, I guess.
Mm.
But I learned to read way before grade school. So I was like 5 years old. I learned to read. I learned to do advanced algebra just from reading math books that I found in the closets from high school, my father's high school. And so I sort of realized that, okay, even though I didn't have an impressive physique or the ability to run fast or high, I could learn how to do that by using my brain. So that led me on a search to figure out how the body works. And when I started to figure it out, to sort of crack the code for myself, I noticed that sharing my theories with others, this was when the internet and forums just started to appear. And people would be raving about what I posted, and I was like, "Wow, that's nice, that's cool." And even my friends, I would quickly become the go-to guy for everything training and nutrition related, and then we get some incredible gains, and very often better gains than I was able to achieve.
Yeah.
But that sort of drove me towards the coaching direction. I was never a good athlete. I tried powerlifting, I tried bodybuilding, so physique-related sports, being strong and being big, and I finished last all the time. But that still drove me to figure out, okay, how can I achieve the best results possible, and then helping others to achieve the best results possible, and in the process created some world champion physiques and performances in various sports. So I sort of realized that I might be onto something here.
Yeah.
The way to sort of crack the code on an individual level instead of just using a general method based on some research study or several, and applying that. It's a good direction to go on, and I'm as evidence-based as they come, but I have to figure out what tools and what markers to use when I monitor and adjust the program on an individual level. So that's sort of what I'm teaching these days. It's how to have the best possible framework to work within, and having a larger perspective instead of just arguing online about whether to do 10 or 20 sets. It's more about the overall picture. Nutrition plays a role, your lifestyle plays a role, stress management, sleep, biorhythm, and circadian rhythm research has been on my mind for the last 5 years or so. And there's more and more studies showing how important that can be.
Right.
Lacking sleep for only a few days will sabotage your muscle and fat loss results by up to 50%.
Sure.
So there's underrated variables that we tend to lose focus on simply because we're looking at the wrong things, and that has sort of been where where I have found my passion. Figuring out what are the missing pieces here that can just make all of this that we're focusing on now become unimportant or less important.
And why do you think that is, that, now after this research, this field has had research for decades now, and we've got, excuse me, we've got people like you who have done, who have really been in the field, we still have so much controversy. There's still these dogmatic camps, and people, even intelligent people, PhDs on completely separate, sides. Why do you think that is, after so much time, that we can't seem to agree on just like, this is, going to be a very good method for most people?
It's difficult to answer because there's different reasons, but what I tend to see, at least now in the modern world where all the information is so accessible, is that it's like information overload. It's so much information, it's difficult to filter out what's correct and in what context. And I think like 99% of arguments online could be avoided if we all started from a common platform of understanding. So some of the arguments are based on semantics. What's low carb?
Right.
It's like below 30 grams for the Atkins followers, but it's like 150 grams for an elite athlete.
Mm-hmm.
It's like low carb where they couldn't even perform well. This, and also I would say big egos, but it's very often fragile egos. That it's becoming so important to be right that you are forgetting that we are all just trying to help people. We could all just agree on that. We want to improve the world. We want to help people. We want to further knowledge, and we want to understand things better. Instead of, vegans versus carnivores, or low versus high volume, or this versus that. It's like, well, what are the common factors here? What are the most important variables? And where does the individual response come in? And could it be something else explaining why these two studies seemingly diverge so much? And very often, yes, it's about the subject pool and the methods and many different things, and the way the data is interpreted.
Right.
So people actually agree way more than they think, but it's becoming so important to prove yourself right sometimes that we just lose perspective completely.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, most people who have been doing this for a while do probably agree on the main principles. But I think it's less of a selling point. We can't just say, oh, well, we agree with everything. So I think those people, those 10% that we disagree on, that's what everybody hears all the time. And so they think that they're just completely opposites.
It's like based on the bring out the popcorn.
Yeah, right.
It's I've had some podcasters bring me on for like a debate with, Mike Israetel or Menno or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, we agree on most things, and that's sort of a letdown for many. That hey, we agree more than we expected to, and yeah, we do. We agree on most things, and then there's some minor nuance or interpretation that we are not completely in agreement on, and that's fine. And you know what to say about self-confidence is not about loving yourself, but it's about accepting that some people may hate you or disagree with you.
Right. I think something that's a little controversial now is the driving mechanisms behind hypertrophy, and almost everybody agrees that, I think, well, most people seem to agree that there's that mechanical tension is a huge factor. And there's a little debate now as far as whether the metabolic stress really matters. And I've heard you say that you think both matter and that the metabolic stress increases mechanical tension, if I'm remembering correctly. Could you explain a little bit?
Tension work better on the muscle.
Say that one more time. I think you cut it.
I think they're both, the mechanical and metabolic pathways are overlapping, but also redundant, meaning that one can enhance the other. But they can also have some hypertrophic signaling on their own. So it's not like some of it is either or, but it's a lot both of them. I think that metabolic stress can compensate for the lack of mechanical stimulation. And this is why the occlusion studies are showing such dramatic effects. There are some very specific effects from metabolic stress that you lack by only focusing on the mechanical component. But you can't get any hypertrophy by only applying metabolic stress, because they have tried that as well. You also need the mechanical component.
How did they try to just induce metabolic stress without the mechanical tension?
They just, kept the occlusion cuffs on. So induced, and even in chambers where they adjusted the oxygen level so that they induce the hypoxia, full body hypoxia, and then do exercise and notice the divergence in muscle growth and responses.
Gotcha. Do we have any studies at this point showing occlusion training combined with strength training versus just the strength training, and then like matched for volume as well as they can? Because I know we certainly see hypertrophy from the occlusion training. I haven't personally read any where they have somebody who's already doing, sufficient strength training if it adds on top of that.
I think there are a few, not that I can think of the specific references, but there's a Swedish study that was just published. I don't think it was even a study. I think it was like a master thesis program where they found some of the most impressive growth rates ever seen in research. And that was a combination of occlusion training every 4th week with like a weekly undulating periodization program. So combining mechanical tension stimulus with low rep, moderate rep, and then again I think it was every 4th week they had occlusion training. And those growth rates were, in also trained people, so it was very impressive.
Do you personally incorporate that type of training, the occlusion training, or do your Myo-Reps kind of, provide a similar stimulus there with the metabolic stress?
There might be some minor pathways you're missing out on with Myo-Reps, simply because it's like internal occlusion compared to external, where you have a blood pressure cuff that occludes blood flow. But according to I've discussed this with Matthias Wernbaum, which was my mentor and friend during the evolution and development of Myo-Reps, and he said that they had data looking at just keeping constant tension on the muscle and just doing high reps and just doing this, the Myo-Rep method basically, where you just insert short rest periods and keep doing reps in a fatigued state, that led to the same markers that they saw with occlusion training.
Okay.
The caveat being that you can get occlusion training to work down at 20 to 30% of one of the max loads. Mm-hmm. So with Myo-Reps, I think that you need at least 40% of one of the max. So from 40 to 60% of one of the max is where Myo-Reps really shines.
Okay. Is that part of the reason why you believe in the constant tension as well? Because I know some trainers, they don't believe in constant tension at all. They say even if you lock out every time and you kind of pause, that's fine. My understanding is you like to keep a constant tension on the muscle. Is that kind of the reason behind that?
I like to do it simply because you do see fewer reps, which is a sign of achieving more fatigue and possibly also higher fiber recruitment and more of that signaling effect. But it's not required. I don't think it's absolutely essential. I just tend to see it improving the effects of Myo-Reps at low loads. But as soon as you get into like 50, 60% of one max territory, where the metabolic stress component becomes less important, it's not as important to keep constant tension anymore either.
Okay. And we're kind of talking about Myo-Reps here without like an introduction to it. I think there's a lot of resources for Myo-Reps, and I think a lot of people watching this probably know about them. But can you just very briefly explain what we're talking about when we say Myo-Reps?
Yeah, so most people know about rest pause training. Maybe at this point, I'm not really sure which one is most renowned. If it's dog crap, DC training, Myo-reps. I tend to think that nowadays Myo-reps is more familiar to people because I see it popping up all over the place.
Right.
But yeah, it's a rest pause method where you just generally do a normal set as usual, getting close to the point of failure. You don't have to go to absolute failure. And the point of doing that is to achieve high fiber recruitment. Basically, it's the Henneman size principle where at light loads, you need to do more reps for all of the muscle fibers to participate. Some fatigue and some motor units, don't contribute as much. Others need to be brought in, and it's just getting to a point where the terminology of effective reps is something I came up with many years ago, and now it's called like either effective or stimulating reps. It's generally considered to be the final 5, 6, 7 reps of a set, depending on many variables. So I'm not going to go into that. But generally getting to the point of fatigue and failure and maintaining that fatigue in order to stay there, to stay at the point of high fiber recruitment. So you just insert short rest periods and do short sets after that main activation set, I call it. So it's like one set and then mini sets after that. And to simplify things, I just say do 3 to 5 sets of 3 to 5 reps with 3 to 5 deep breaths of rest in between.
Okay.
So it's sort of easier to remember.
Okay.
And it's just a fatigue management technique to sort of compress. I have actually seen data comparing 3 straight sets to something very similar to a Myo-rep set, and 3 straight sets is the same effect-wise as 1 Myo-rep set. So it's like 1 minute 30 of total workout time compared to 6 minutes.
Right. Yeah, I think I've seen that as well.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me, that study that you brought up, because if it's the one I'm thinking of, you would of course end up having lower volume, because if you're going without that rest time, we always talk about how once volume is equated, and that's the biggest factor. But if you're doing that superset there, where the Myo-reps, you of course have to use lighter weight than if you rested a full 2 or 3 minutes. So it is interesting that even with that lower volume, you're still seeing similar hypertrophy.
Yeah, and I think there are pathways we still don't understand.
Sure.
So that's also what I've been told, that, well, we see it working, but we don't really know why.
Right. Yeah. And just for people listening, DC that he was talking about, the dog crap method, that's a little bit older, so I think maybe some of the newer people don't know about it, but that is essentially 3 rest pause sets. And rather than 3 to 5 breaths, he talks about taking 10 to 20 breaths. So you could be looking at a 30+ rest period, which to me, I always consider that almost completely different sets at that point. Once you start getting into 45 seconds to a minute rest, that's like a new set to me. But yeah, similarities, but certainly not the same thing. And he also uses
way heavier loads. So
he does, yeah.
And it's chasing fatigue. You're supposed to go all out on those sets.
Yeah, reset. Yeah.
Way of training. And I've done DC training by one of the main DC trainers, and used to discuss things with Dante Trudel himself, and it just beat me up completely.
Sure. Yeah.
Well,
Who was the trainer you worked with?
I can't remember his name right now, but he was like one of the main DC trainers. I also worked with Ken Skip Hill for a while, and he was an opponent of that. So.
Yeah, I used to talk with Ken and Scott Stevenson quite a bit.
Oh yeah, Scott, awesome.
Scott's amazing. Yeah,
I really love the guy. He's one of the most likable guys in the industry.
Yeah. So, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that people make when trying to incorporate Myo-reps? Maybe they just like read a paragraph on it and they think, I should do it. How do people mess that up?
Well, first of all, is maybe applying it too soon. I have seen people just jump straight into it and do it on everything, and maybe not realizing that it may be too much, or that they are again chasing fatigue in such a way that they're not recovering. So if they get back to the gym 1 or 2 days later and try to repeat the workout and they just fatigued or weaker, then that's sort of an obvious sign that you still have some muscle damage going on.
Mm-hmm.
And muscle damage is related to the conditioning of the tissue, the conditioning of the muscle at the time you apply the training method or loads. So you need to keep that in mind. So until you reach a certain level of conditioning, it might be too much. And it might be better to just do straight sets for a while and then gradually introduce Myo-Reps and sort of learn how to pace yourself, because I see some people jump into this and just do what they can and strain and grind and squeeze out that like 15 plus 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 type of Myo-Rep set, and that's just completely, seeing life passing in front of you.
Right.
So that, and also using exercises that just take so much cardiovascular conditioning that you can't really apply the proper load to the muscle. So, Mike Tuchscherer used the Myo-Rep protocol on squats, but for some of his trainees, and they would hate him, they would hate me, and they would hate life.
Right.
So it's doable, and some people have done it with great success, but it's more of a cardiovascular effort than the actual, muscle-based workouts.
And maybe this depends on which exercise you're using it for, but are we still trying to progress with that, like the weights over time with the Myo-Reps, or is it ultimately just adding fatigue at the end of an already progressive workout?
In my mind, I find that progressive overload is the main driver of hypertrophy. I know others might disagree and consider volume a main driver. And I tend to say, well, you can have all the volume you want, but if you keep dropping your loads and becoming weaker, then you're not building muscle. So all the way back in 1975, it was shown by Goldspink in that famous paper that progressive mechanical overload is the very key, even regardless of volume applied. So volume is certainly a driver, but it's not the primary driver. So you can just keep doing Myo-Reps all you want, but if you never progress the loads, then it will stop working. And there is actually a good study also looking at occlusion training, that after 2 to 3 weeks, it stops working. So at that time, obviously you can keep incrementing the loads. I find that to be very effective, but what they showed in this recent paper I looked at from Wormbaum again was that 10 days of rest resensitized the muscle, and reapplying occlusion training, reapplying load, and it grew just as well as it did the last time they trained the muscle.
Oh, wow, okay. Is that part of why that study had it just every 3rd or 4th week that you mentioned?
No, that's a different study. So this was a Norwegian study.
Okay, gotcha.
There's a lot of good Norwegian data looking at how resting a muscle may just be one key to allow lower volumes and lower loads to make a muscle grow, and not only just increasing volume and load over time and eventually having to rely on that high volume and load just to maintain. There might be something for deconditioning the tissue, something that Brian Haycock of...
I was just about to say, Brian Haycock used to talk about that all the time.
He discussed this like 16, 17 years ago, and there might just be something to it. I know many people disagree on this, but it has definitely been one of the most underrated aspects of programming that I used to do, and I stopped doing for many, many years. And again, I mean, taking a week of rest, what the fuck, man? Is that
right?
I have people saying, I could never stay out of the gym for a full week. And okay, so I guess if that's what life is all about for you, then sure, I can understand that. Just keep grinding away.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lose any sleep over it, but I consider just, and I'm not even saying that you need to take 1 or 2 weeks completely off the gym. you can decondition certain parts of your body and still train others. So, for instance, if you have shoulder surgery, I've had two. I kept training my legs.
Right.
So it's not like you need complete rest. But once I got back to training, I had some significant atrophy in those body parts that I couldn't train. Once I got back to training, my left side now was bigger than my right side.
Yeah.
I had the surgery on my left side, and the left side is usually the weaker side.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about your deloading protocol, actually, because I had heard you one time say that you don't agree with the people who say deload just by cutting volume in half for the week or something like that. I was going to ask why you don't agree with that, and do you just prefer just taking an entire week off in that case?
Well, deloading in the sense that it's reactive. If you see that you're under recovered during the training process, and you're still only like 4 to 6 weeks deep into training, I would say that if you constantly need to deload, there's something wrong with your program. And I even had this I saw James Krieger posting about it in his group yesterday, that while we still don't have any research showing that the overreaching deloading or dual factor theory of training is true. There's no research showing that you actually need to consciously overtrain or overreach,
right,
and unload or deload from that stimulus in order to see some growth. There's no physiological process in the body that relies on this mindset or philosophy at all. It's like intentionally getting a sunburn so that you would have to spend a week indoors to recover from that sunburn, and then better suntan. I prefer to have a proper stress and a proper recovery, and constantly see progress. And obviously, for some people, for some periods of time, some of the supercompensation research comes from sports. It relies on having to balance different types of stressors. So when you apply different, that's where periodization comes in, where you have different qualities that needs to be either maintained or improved upon, depending on the sport and the athlete and the position they're playing. But for like a singular type of stimulus, where you're asking the muscle to grow stronger, and you're asking the neurological system to improve its firing rates and all of that jazz that makes you stronger, I don't think we need to do that. Programming should be way simpler. So tapering or peaking, I can certainly understand that. It's more a function of ensuring that you have all of the resources you need to perform in the competition. But I tend to say that if you are programming correctly and you add more rest days and you get weaker, that's a sign that your program is optimal. So if you are on the brink of, like on the dose response curve, that the raging debate is whether volume, more volume is better.
Yeah.
But I think we can conclude, at least based on most of the population, that the dose response curve is bell-shaped.
Yeah.
So there's going to be, like in Mike Israel's words, maximum recoverable volume. I don't think being on that verge of overreaching, overtraining all the time is a very productive place to be.
Okay.
I prefer to be at the point where you just sort of below that optimal point, so that you have a bigger you have a better buffer. So if you under recover by not sleeping, not eating well, or having some immune system infection going on, then you will move closer to the maximum in terms of how that stressor is perceived by the body. But if you're on the verge of overreaching all the time, then it doesn't take much more than maybe one night of bad sleep before it pushes you into that, downward spiral.
Right.
If you keep doing that over time, then obviously you will overreach, and then you will need to reduce your training stress, either volume or intensity or both, in order to recover. And now that we have some very good evidence from the Deloads studies that muscle damage is not required for muscle hypertrophy, and essentially where muscle protein synthesis is directed towards for repairing instead of growing. Then I tend to think that we should stay at a more sustainable level of training where we can progress over time instead of chasing sort of that maximum, optimum, or whatever, based on studies looking at average subject pools, and then try to apply that on an individual level. And then, what, again, what's the rush? Why?
Right.
I mean, are you trying to peak for a competition in 8 weeks? I can completely understand that you want to squeeze the most gains out of that time you have available. But if you plan to be in this game for hopefully until you're old, 60s, 70s, or 80s, what's the rush? Whether you reach your genetic ceiling, because let's realize it, you're only going to get so big as no matter what you do outside of drugs, and your hormonal environment will judge or determine how big you're going to be. Whether that takes 3 to 4 years or 6 to 7 years, does that really make a big difference?
Right.
So it's more about enjoying the process of getting there. And if you're constantly on the verge of overreaching and just missing one night of sleep pushes you into that negative spiral, why not just stay slightly lower on that curve and have some room to meet life? Because optimal meets life all the time, every single day. I'm a father of a 13-month-old baby, so I know all about sleep and affected daily life.
So it sounds like for you, if somebody completely optimally structured their routine, they wouldn't need a deload then. It's only, like you said, kind of reactionary. If something really, gets thrown in life that kind of knocks you off, then you'll deload. But if things were done properly, you might never need to deload because things are, you're at that good level.
Yeah, that's my general philosophy.
Okay, cool.
If you properly manage your training, you should be able to continuously get stronger and bigger and improve over time. Maybe not by much, because let's face it, muscle growth is hard to measure unless you have some very fine instruments only available in the lab. So you need to look at progress over the long term. So trying to be perfect on every single workout is just, a waste of time. People are so stressed out and OCD about these minor details that they lose perspective.
Yeah.
You can't be perfect. So how about just accepting that and your life,
You had mentioned, being right at the cusp there of that volume. And obviously, I'm sure you're familiar with the new Schoenfeld study showing those crazy high volumes, 45 sets for lower body, 30 for upper body. Do you think maybe that's part of why they saw those good results? Because it was a relatively short-term study, and maybe if they kept going with those volumes, they'd start to, be past the recovery limits? Or any thoughts on that study in general?
Yeah, I guess if I start delving into this, I think Lyle McDonald did a pretty good article series on that study. I'm not as angry as he is.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's as angry as he is.
Yeah, hopefully. But I do tend to agree with some of the points that he makes, that there could very well be some swelling going on. And yeah, it's a short-term study in young subjects in college. So basically everything is optimized for making gains on a short-term level. And actually one of my favorite books is Physiology of Strength by Hedinger from the 60s. It's an East German researcher that looked at training response, and they have studied, I think it's like 4,000 or 5,000 people over many, many years. Everyone served as, it was like an intra-individual control setting where one leg would train a certain way and the other would train another way. And not only did they see that you need less volume and intensity to grow optimally than most people will think today, but they saw that some individuals, and where they really pushed the envelope and saw some very impressive rate of gains, they peaked at a certain level and then dropped. They saw that over and over and over again. And their theory at the time, I mean, this is 50 years ago, but their theory has seemed to be proven right in later studies, recent studies, that connective tissue and overall body inflammation needs to be taken into context.
Okay.
So not only, like, the muscle is really plastic and adaptable, and they have this crazy synergistic ablation studies where, in the rats, obviously, they cut the tendon of the gastrocnemius and they see the soleus replacing that missing muscle in strength and muscle mass within a few days. So the muscle is capable of some pretty impressive superhuman growth rates. But connective tissue, the tendons and the joints can't really keep up with that. So the reason why I keep hammering on about this point, when people again are chasing maximum and optimum and whatever, and it's like just doing the most to achieve some very impressive growth rates in the short term. I have worked with people for many, many years, and like if you're willing to accept a slightly slower rate of gains, I believe that rate of gains can be kept up for longer than just going for maximum. I've also seen some, doing high frequency, high volume, high everything, you can achieve impressive results. But if that requires you to take a lot of time off later on to recover from it, and you just like warmed over shit doing it, then I'm sorry, what's the point? Are you a Navy SEAL? I mean, is the point just to see how far you can push yourself? If that's the case, then go ahead. But me having suffered several injuries and having worked with people with regular lives and daily challenges to their recovery and stress, then picking a program that you can do for long enough for it to matter, I believe is a way more sustainable strategy, which is why I'm, part of this whole sustainable self-development. That choosing that strategy, and again, it's like, because people understand money. So I always use that metaphor that if you have a savings account with $100,000 and you want to invest those money and make that money grow over time, you would carefully choose where you place that money. Make smart investments so that, and watch it grow slowly but surely. Or you could just put it on like a single horse in a race because someone told you to.
Right.
Or like in Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency, really volatile. And you could double your money in a few days, but you could also lose all your money in 2 days. So are you an investor or are you a gambler? And that will sort of determine where people fall on the spectrum when they make decisions about their training as well. It's like, well, I'm willing to push myself to the brink of exhaustion just to see double growth rates in the next 8 weeks. Then go ahead. More power to you. But don't come complaining. I mean, these are the guys that come to me for rehab.
Right.
And even if it takes 3 months, they sometimes get better gains in those 3 months that they have done the past 3 years of overreaching, underreaching, basically just having to take time off or deload or whatever, just going back and forth and suffering injuries and having setbacks and having to reset and stagnating and all that stuff. And that's what you see in the real world outside of research studies.
Right. And I think a common theme here is we talk about having these stresses outside of just a perfect, optimal situation. And you had mentioned there are studies on sleep showing dramatic differences when people are sleep deprived in terms of how much fat they can lose and how much muscle they gain. Do we have any quantifiable studies showing psychological stress? Because we kind of talk about how all stress is stress, but anything showing that people are more psychologically stressed, having worse results in the gym or, with fat loss and muscle gain?
Yeah, there's a very good study that I always use in my presentations. It's about students during exam periods. And it shows that after like a leg extension protocol. I can't remember the protocol, but during a stressful period of time, like so during exams, their recovery time doubled and tripled.
Wow.
So whereas they would recover their strength within 24 to 48 hours normally after that protocol, and even have some super compensation, they were still not back to baseline in the stressed out condition. And this was also a subjective study, meaning that they would rate their own perception of stress.
Mm-hmm.
So those that are, you could put two people in the same life situation, and your ability to handle stress will also determine your ability to handle stress from training. So it's like the sum of stressors in your life and the way you manage those and handle those that determine basically your recovery abilities.
Awesome.
So there's some very good studies on that.
Yeah, cool. So I like to kind of end with an actionable step for people listening. So if somebody's coming and they are kind of more, regular person, they like lifting, but they have other things in life, and they want to start trying to incorporate some of your methods like Myo-Reps, what's your kind of next step for those people looking to do that if they have an otherwise kind of complicated life?
I would be happy with going to the gym 2 to 3 times per week, which is exactly what I'm doing at my level. And I would say that you could get the highest return of investment, to use that investment terminology again, just doing 2 to 3 sets per muscle group per workout. So 2 to 3 sets, 2 to 3 times per week will get you probably 60 to 70% towards optimal. So if you are willing and able to quadruple that training volume and frequency and recover from that, you will probably get double the gain rate, like the rate of gains.
Mm-hmm.
But over a training career, I don't believe it makes a difference. So having something that you feel comfortable doing, that you can just trust works for you, and that you can recover from, and that you can, just enjoy your next workout, looking forward to the next workout instead of dreading it. So sustainability and consistency is the key to progress, not chasing optimal or maximum.
Awesome. And then that's a big part of your sustainable self-development program. Do you want to just briefly mention that?
Yeah. So this is like the culmination of all of my wisdom over 20 plus years of working with close to 5,000 people, where it's more about accepting a slightly slower rate of gains, but a more sustainable rate of gains that you can just keep doing and put an automatic in such a way that you don't structure your life around training and eating. It's the other way around, the way it should, in my opinion. Because let's face it, that at the end of life, and the length of that life can be very different for humans. We don't know a lot of stuff for sure, but that's one thing we do know for sure, that you are going to die someday.
Yeah.
And at the end of that life, what would you want to remember and reflect on? And that's experiences, that's relationships with family and loved ones, and perhaps even career goals, but very few tend to list their career achievements when they're at the brink of dying. So just having something being part of your life instead of the focus of your life is, in my mind, the best way to achieve those goals.
Awesome. And I'll put a link down below for that. And where can people find you? I know you're on Instagram. Anywhere else?
I'm not very much on Instagram, I'll admit.
Yeah, okay.
I haven't been much on social media at all, simply because there's a lot of noise these days, and I prefer to stay out of that. Again, I'm focusing more on pursuing my own careers and passions, and my son, which is more important than life itself at the moment.
More important than lifting?
Yeah, well, okay, so yeah. So, and that was sort of the big mindfuck for myself is that just scaling back my own training and my focus on nutrition and all that stuff, and stop being so OCD about it, improved my results and just made me enjoy it all. That's what I wanted to share. Hey, this is sort of my eureka moment. If you can get to this place yourself, then it will become fun again. And it's not something that you need to either stop doing because it's so overwhelming, or do too much of because you think there's going to be some type of perfect thing out there, or that you are going to be happy once you reach that goal, that goal that is the rainbow kind of thing.
Right,
so
right.
It's more about getting full enjoyment out of life as it is, and yeah.
Awesome. No, I think it's a great message in this industry. I think we can get pretty OCD and obsessed with all of this. So I think that's great. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for talking with us. And like I said, I'll put all the links below, and we can get you on for a part 2 at some time.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.